When Claire inherited her grandmother's house on Ashwood Lane, she thought it was a gift. She had been living paycheck to paycheck in a cramped apartment, walls thin enough that she could hear her neighbors fight through the night. The idea of moving into a full-sized house, a real home, felt like salvation. She imagined quiet evenings by the fireplace, mornings filled with sunlight pouring through wide kitchen windows, and long afternoons spent in the garden her grandmother had once loved. It seemed like the perfect way to start over. But the house had other plans. The house was old, built in the 1940s, with narrow hallways and slanted floors that creaked beneath her steps. It smelled faintly of cedar and something else, a sharpness buried beneath the wood and dust. Claire tried to convince herself it was just age, the smell of a home that hadn't been lived in for years. At first, everything was ordinary. She unpacked slowly, room by room, setting her grandmother's china back into the cabinets, hanging. Old photographs where the wallpaper peeled. The place had history, warmth, a lived-in charm. But the nights were different. On the first night, Claire lay awake listening to the house breathe. That was how it sounded, like the walls were alive, expanding and contracting. The pipes groaned, the rafters shifted, the wind pressed low moans against the siding. It should have been comforting, the usual noise of an old home. But to Claire, it felt watchful. She drifted into uneasy sleep and woke to the sound of footsteps in the attic. She froze, heart pounding. The attic door was in the hall, directly outside. Her bedroom. She stared at it, half expecting it to swing open, but it stayed closed. The next morning, she climbed the ladder, heart in her throat, flashlight in hand. The attic was empty, just dust, old boxes, and the smell of mothballs. She laughed nervously at herself. Houses creak, that was all. But as she turned to leave, her light caught something scratched into the wood of the attic floor. Letters, faint and shallow, like they had been carved in haste. Don't let him in. Claire didn't tell anyone. She barely had anyone to tell. Her parents had died when she was a teenager. Her closest friend lived 2 states away. Still, she thought about sending a picture, making a joke out of it, but something stopped her. Some weight in her stomach told her not to share it. That night, the footsteps came again, and something else, whispering, too faint to make out, but constant. It drifted down through the attic door like mist, pressing into her dreams. She dreamt of shadows leaning over her bed, of a man with no face standing in the corner of her room. She woke drenched in sweat, the whisper still echoing in her ears. The days passed in a blur. She tried to busy herself, gardening, cleaning, small repairs, but the house never let her forget. Doors she swore she closed stood ajar. Lights flickered even after she replaced the bulbs. The air was always too cold in the hall by the attic, and then came the smell, rot. It seeped into her bedroom late at night, sour and heavy, so strong it clawed at her throat. She scoured the house, convinced an animal had died in the walls, but she found nothing but the smell and the dreams. Always the same man, always the same faceless shadow. One evening, as she sat in the living room with a blanket pulled tight around her, she heard a knock, slow, deliberate, at the front door. Claire's breath caught. She hadn't had a visitor in weeks. The knock came again, louder. She stood, legs trembling, and called out, "Who's there?" No answer. She peered through the window. No one. The porch was empty, the street quiet, but the knocking didn't stop. Instead, it shifted to the back door. She ran through the house, flicking on every light, heart slamming in her chest. The back door rattled with the sound of knuckles against wood. Then silence. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass of the window, breath fogging. That was when she heard the whisper, clear as day, right behind her ear. "Let me in!" She spun, around. No one was there. Claire didn't sleep that night, or the night after. The house hummed with noise, whispers bleeding through the walls, the attic thudding with phantom steps. She grew pale, unsteady, her reflection hollowed by sleeplessness. Coffee and fear were the only things keeping her upright. By the end of the week, she knew she couldn't stay, but leaving wasn't easy. Every time she tried to pack, the house resisted. The lights went out. The air grew heavy. The whispers rose until she dropped to her knees, hands clamped over her ears, sobbing. She called her friend once, desperate, voice shaking. She tried to explain, tried to say she needed help, but the line filled with static, and beneath that static, she swore she heard laughter. She hung up, and she didn't call again. On the 10th night, the attic door was open. She stood in the hall, staring at it, her breath misting in the cold air. She hadn't opened it. She was certain. Her flashlight shook as she climbed the ladder. The attic was darker than before, the air sharp with the smell of rot. In the corner, she saw a figure, tall, still, watching. Her light flickered. The figure didn't move. Claire's throat closed. She scrambled down the ladder, slammed the attic, door shut, and shoved the heaviest chair she could find beneath it. She pressed her back against the wall, gasping, heart a wild drum in her chest. That night, the whisper didn't come from the attic. It came from the other side of her bedroom. Door, please, let me in. Days blurred into weeks. Claire stopped opening the blinds. She stopped answering the phone. She lived in dim light, trapped in her own home, afraid of the walls that seemed to breathe with her. Her reflection in the mirror grew unfamiliar. Dark circles, sunken cheeks, eyes wide with constant fear. She hardly recognized herself. The house wanted her to give in. She knew it. The whispers weren't just sounds. They were invitations, pleas, commands. Sometimes, when exhaustion pressed down hard enough, she almost wanted to obey, to open the attic, or the door, or whatever threshold the thing waited behind. Almost. But then she'd remember the message scratched into the attic floor. Don't let him in. The final night came in winter. Snow piled high against the windows, wind rattling the panes. Claire sat in the living room, blanket wrapped tight, fire guttering low. The knocking started at midnight. Front door, back door, bedroom door, all at once. The whispers swelled, a chorus of voices, filling the house until the walls shook. Claire pressed her hands over her ears, tears streaming, rocking on the floor. The lights blew out, the fire died, and then silence. Utter, complete silence. When she opened her eyes, he was there, the faceless man, standing in the corner, closer now than ever. His voice was soft, almost kind. You've been so lonely, just let me in. Claire's body trembled. She wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. She wanted to scream, but her voice was gone. The man stepped closer, and she realized something horrifying. He wasn't asking anymore. When neighbors found the house weeks later, it was empty. Claire's belongings were scattered, half-packed. The chair still braced the attic door, but Claire was gone. Some swore they heard her voice in the house at night, whispering through the walls. Others said they saw a shadow in the windows, tall and faceless, standing perfectly still. No one lives there now, but sometimes, when the snow piles high and the wind cuts sharp, children dare each other to run up the porch and knock on the door, and they all swear the same thing before they can run away. A voice from inside whispers, "Come in." The first lesson I learned as a sound designer was that true silence doesn't exist. Even in a sealed studio, you can hear the building breathe, the soft tick of cooling ducts, a low electrical thrum, the tiny papery sighs of dust settling on foam. You learn to love those noises. They tell you what kind of room you're inside. When I bought the house on Waverley Court, I bought it because it seemed to have none. It sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, like a punctuation mark someone forgot to erase. A low mid-century box with a sunken living room and a long glassy wall that watched the street. It had been empty for 2 years, a foreclosure that outlasted winter twice. The yard was neat because the HOA sent someone to mow it. The for sale sign had paint rubbed off where hands had gripped it, thinking about pulling it up and leaving. Stepped inside on a Tuesday morning at 10. The agent pushed the door open with 2 fingers and said brightly, "Roomy." The air was cool and smelled faintly of lemon oil and empty spaces. The carpet had the hush of a church. We walked through, without speaking much. The ceilings were low. The kitchen wore a tile grin. In the back, down 3 steps, the living room opened like a stage. My footsteps made nothing. No soft slap, no breath of echo. I clapped my hands once, out of habit. The sound died halfway to the wall. "It's quiet," I said. The agent smiled, like I'd noticed a virtue. "Good bones." I bought it at asking because I could. I told myself I needed the quiet for work. I told myself the quiet would hold me together. The first night I slept on a borrowed mattress on the living room floor, staring up at a ceiling that hunkered down like it didn't want company. Wind moved through the ash trees on the next lot. I could see the branches sway in the reflected light from the kitchen. Somewhere, a sprinkler coughed on. The digital clock on the stove burned a green number into the dark. The quiet lay on my chest like a heavy book. In the morning, I made coffee and unpacked microphones. I lined my favorites on the counter like silver chess pieces, pencil condensers for room tone, a fat ribbon mic that loved the low end of weather, the scuffed shotgun that had heard more arguments than I had. I set a pair of Omni mics at ear height in the living room, hit record, and walked away. Let the room introduce itself. I listened to the file on headphones an hour later, sitting on the floor with a legal pad on my knees. At first, the whisper of the HVAC drawing breath, the faintest presence of the refrigerator compressor 2 rooms away. My pen moved, baseline, clean. Then, in the 20-second mark, something else arrived, thin as thread, a tone. Not the flat 50 or 60 hertz I'd expect from mains. Not the common chorus of a house singing its electricity. Higher than that, maybe 19, maybe 22. Too low for most people to notice. Right on the edge of where your bones hear before your ears do. I leaned into the headphones, held my breath, slid tracking software across the waveform to follow the pitch like a hunter follows tracks. The tone rose very slightly, fell, rose again, as if the room were clearing its throat. The hair along my arms prickled. I told myself I was being romantic. Houses made noises. I'd moved to the quiet end of town. There was a substation half a mile away. Maybe the wind made the lines sing. I recorded again. The tone was still there, louder when I stood near the north wall, quiet when I stepped back, toward the kitchen, louder by the stairs, quieter by the window. I taped blue X's on the spots where it swelled. I knelt and pressed my palm to the carpet, the pad, the slab beneath. It was cool, steady, no vibration that I could name. By the 3rd hour, I had a grid of tape dots spreading across the living room like stars you could step on. I stood on each one in turn with my headphones on, eyes closed, listening. The tone thickened at certain places, like stepping into a patch of sunlight with your eyes shut. At one dot near the hallway, there was more than tone. There was shape, edges. Inside the sound, ridges like a voice trying to grow teeth. I called Jay from the studio. "Ground loop," he said, mouth full of something. "Bad power. It's not cycling. It moves when I move. Your body's an antenna. You're detuning it. It sounds like..." I stopped. I didn't want to say a voice. "Like modulation. Shut down the mains and listen," he said. "If it's still there, panic." I laughed because that's what you do when someone says the thing out loud. I went to the panel in the garage and threw the main. The house sighed as everything unlatched. The fridge fell quiet. The clock on the stove went dark. The tone in my headphones did not change. It seemed, if anything, pleased. That night, the quiet swelled until it had weight. When I lay down in the living room, the couch gave a weary groan, and then nothing, like it realized talking would only get it in trouble. I left the sliding door curtains cracked 2 inches, so the alley light would draw a pale stripe on the floor. Every few minutes, a car passed 3 streets over, sound arriving long after light, attenuated by air and distance, until it felt like a memory of traffic instead of the thing itself. I woke at 3:17 with my name in my ear, Mara. It was as soft as a lip against hair. I jerked upright so fast the world tilted. The room was empty and full, the kind of dark that prefers you don't move. I turned on the lamp with a shaking hand. Yellow light made the tape X's wink. The tone drifted through my jaw like a swallowed bee. Mara. I held still so long I forgot that I could move. When I finally stood, the room seemed to stand with me. "Okay," I said, to nobody the way you talk to a stray dog that might bite. "Okay." The second morning I found the note. It wasn't a note like paper. It was writing, low on the drywall behind the long couch, in pencil that had been rubbed partly away by years of furniture pressed against it. Tiny block letters, straight as a typesetter's prayer. "Do not tune," it said. "He answers." There were smaller lines under it in a different hand. "He answered me. He will answer you." I lay on my side on the floor and breathed the dust in the carpet and read the words over and over until the sun reached them and made the graphite shine. Then I pulled the couch 2 feet forward and sat across from the sentence like it was a performance, and I waited to feel foolish. I did not. I drove to the county clerk to look up who had owned the house before me. The name was Helen Carrow. She had owned it 2 decades. There was no sale listed to anyone between me and the bank. Helen had died in the hospital. The house had sat. I googled the name in the parking lot with my thumb and found nothing but a bowling league record from 1998. I thought about calling the league. I bought painter's tape and batteries on the way home. and thought about how you know you've crossed a line when you can name the moment you did it. Mine was lying on the carpet reading a stranger's warning, as if I had paid good money for it. The neighbor on my right was an old man with a white beard that had chosen a shape and stuck to it. He watered his hedge at exactly 6. On the third night, he waved at me like someone embarrassed by his own hand and said, "You're the new one." "Yes," I said. "Mara. Ellison," he said. "Walter, if you like." He looked at my house while I looked at his. His had a flag. Mine had a glass eye. "You get much radio at night?" he asked. The question was so strange I smiled. "I don't own one." He nodded like that fit a theory. "Skip gets funny off that place. I pull in numbers from Cuba when the weather's right. Used to get a preacher from Amarillo every hour on the hour till he quit speaking." He sipped from a hose and spat the sip into the grass. "Every house is a kind of antenna. Yours is a hungry one." "I do audio," I said, like that explained anything. "I moved here for the quiet." His mouth did an unpleasant thing like tasting a joke that had gone bad. The next morning, there was a cardboard box on my porch with no return. Address. Inside was a battered spiral notebook, navy cover cracked white along the fold, a strip of masking tape as a label, room tone. On the first page, a neat hand. "If you took the house, you took this." The name at the bottom was Helen Caro in small, careful letters. I sat on the floor by the window and began to read. The entries started in 2004, dotted through years like stitches. Helen wrote like a scientist and like someone whispering in church. She had been a court reporter. She had moved in because it was quiet, and then become attentive because it wasn't. The first entries were measurements, dB levels, frequencies, times. Then came theories, standing waves made by dimensional ratio, subharmonics modulated by road noise, temperature changes damping reverb. Then a sentence I read 3 times. It speaks in conditionals. If I stand here, then it says that. If I bring in a bowl of water, the pitch lowers. If I hum, it braids me into itself. She began mapping the house with tape like I had. Her grid was tighter than mine. In a margin, she had sketched a figure 8 that lay over the living room, peaking near the hallway where my loudest dot lived. She called that place a node. She called it the ear. Next to the drawing, he prefers whispers. Shouting hurts him. In 2009, he is not a he. Gender is my concession to speaking. It listens and offers what it gathers back. It is not the past. It is a mirror. It is the room's own memory pretending to be mine. In 2011, Walter says his radio is full of me. He hears me at 3 a.m., reciting menus from restaurants I loved when I was 20. He hears me hum. He hears me pray. Then, beneath, I do not pray. He is lying about the prayer, or the houses. The notebook smelled faintly of something that was not my house and not hers. It smelled like airport paper and old purse. I turned pages with a softness that felt like apology. In the last quarter, the handwriting faltered. Some days she wrote, in giant letters that jumped the lines. Once she wrote an entire page of the sentence. It is so polite. The last entry was 3 words, do not tune. That night, I moved my work lights, my speakers, my little sign generator into the living room. It felt like bringing tools into a confession booth. I found cabinets in the garage full of weird things. Copper wire, a bucket of ferret rings, a roll of mesh that might have been for a Faraday cage if you believed in such things. The previous owner had believed in such things. The last owner had drawn chalk circles on the concrete under the carpet that someone had sanded and then given up sanding when the chalk refused to forget. Yours is a hungry one. I do audio, I said, like that explained anything. I moved here for the quiet. His mouth did an unpleasant thing like tasting a joke that had gone bad. The next morning, there was a cardboard box on my porch with no return. Address. Inside was a battered spiral notebook, navy cover cracked white along the fold, a strip of masking tape as a label, room tone. On the first page, a neat hand. If you took the house, you took this. The name at the bottom was Helen Caro in small, careful letters. I sat on the floor by the window and began to read. The entries started in 2004, dotted through years like stitches. Helen wrote like a scientist and like someone whispering in church. She had been a court reporter. She had moved in because it was quiet and then become attentive because it wasn't. The first entries were measurements, dB levels, frequencies, times. Then came theories. Standing waves made by dimensional ratio. Subharmonics modulated by road noise. Temperature changes damping reverb. Then a sentence I read 3 times. It speaks in conditionals. If I stand here, then it says that. If I bring in a bowl of water, the pitch lowers. If I hum, it braids me into itself. She began mapping the house with tape like I had. Her grid was tighter than mine. In a margin, she had sketched a figure 8 that lay over the living room, peaking near the hallway where my loudest dot lived. She called that place a node. She called it the ear. Next to the drawing, he prefers whispers. Shouting hurts him. In 2009, he is not a he. Gender is my concession to speaking. It listens and offers what it gathers back.